Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to your continuing discussion about whatever this is, right? That's pretty gross. So, of course, as we know, that is falsy jaw, aka cancer of the lower jaw caused by the inhaling of white phosphorus that actually is going to be very, very relevant during the Matchstick Girls strike of 1888. Which, taking y'all's recommendation, I'm actually going to try and watch some of these Enola Holmes movies on Netflix this weekend and maybe this week as well, because apparently they're supposed to be really, really good. So thank y'all so much for the suggestion. I love the fact that one of those films actually has a very big discussion about this strike that went down in the late 1800s that you and I are going to use as a great example of socialist organization, as well as the effectiveness of striking, as well as the effectiveness of using strikes and nonviolent protests as forms to actually get laws passed that are going to help regulate workers' rights and actually usher in liberal reform. Now, the big thing about it, though, is that we left off kind of like midway through the story, right? I know Olivia Farrell was really digging it because she likes that movie a lot that actually talks about this. And you're not the only one, Olivia. I've talked to numerous girls that were all like, wait a minute, that actually happened? Like, get to my academic classes and my honors classes and stuff like that had no idea that this Matchstick Girl strike was actually a very real thing, right? But anyway, we left off talking about like how that could happen to your face and then you could end up getting falsy jaw from inhaling that white phosphorus, right? So as we know, these girls were working really, really long hours. They were making 1,400 frames a day. They were cutting their fingers off with the cutter. They were inhaling white phosphorus. And they were also being fined heavily by foremen and being physically abused sometimes by foremen because of like having dirty feet or needing to go to the bathroom and like stuff like that. So they're going to begin to fight for their rights, right? And actually a woman comes along named Annie Besant, who actually is a very, very prominent female figure in this entire movement. She's actually sitting right there. And so she actually comes along and starts helping the girls figure out how to go on strike and how to demand more things and more rights. And a lot of this gets kicked up after someone was unlawfully fired, right? One of their actual leaders and one of the managers of the strike, the Matchstick Girls, gets fired, and so all of them begin to say, this is it, and they have their moment, right? And they start spilling into the streets, and they start holding numerous strikes, numerous marches, and demanding that Bryant and Mays, the company that actually owned the Matchstick factory, actually give them certain things. And the two big things they demanded at the Matchstick Girl strike was they wanted to, one, stop using white phosphorus, right? They wanted to use red phosphorus instead. Red phosphorus is safer to inhale, and it's what modern-day matches are made out of. If you actually look at a match from a matchbook these days, red phosphorus is the red tip that's on the matches today. And that actually means a lot of Bryant and Mays didn't want to use red phosphorus because it was going to cost a little bit extra money, and also it's going to cost more money because you have to put a strike surface on the box itself. You have to put a flint strike surface on the box so you can actually strike a red match. Whereas white phosphorus can be struck anywhere, and it actually can use any friction. That's why if you ever go into the grocery store and you see strike anywhere matches, they have a little white tip on them and stuff like that because it's actually white phosphorus that's used for those rather than red. But in the modern era, some of you are like, well, why are we still using white phosphorus? Are people still getting falsy jaw? Well, no, actually the white phosphorus nowadays is produced in a much more ethical way. Now, the big thing about it, though, is they wanted to use red phosphorus instead, and they also wanted one other simple little thing. They wanted a break room. They wanted a room that's not on the factory floor, so they're not have to inhaling all these chemicals and things like that, and they wanted to be able to peacefully eat their lunch away from it getting contaminated. Oh, God forbid that we give people a break room and things like that. But their strike actually was extremely effective, and it got all of their demands met, right? All of their demands were immediately met. And what they're going to get, of course, are better, more harmonious working situations, right? Which is a really big thing that we now have to take a little bit of time to talk about. By the way, I'm going to keep this flip nice and short. We're going to have this bad boy at about 20 minutes, right? So we're going to keep it nice and short because you know what? It's a Sunday and we had to talk about mouth cancer. Now, the thing about it is that is not the only time a strike has occurred. This right here is an actual coffee cup that commemorates the Blackburn riots in May of 1878. So as you can see, workers are beginning to organize much more effectively during the late 1800s. And socialists are beginning to realize maybe we might not get elected to the Reichstag all the time. Maybe we might not get elected to the Chamber of Deputies all the time. Maybe we might not be getting elected to the House of Commons constantly, but we could still organize the workers and force these factory owners to pass legislation and do what we need them to do using certain strategies, right? And so what we're seeing is that Marxism and socialism are beginning to come to very different things. And right now, over the weekend, you are beginning to read Marxism, right? You are reading the Communist Manifesto or your section. I know, again, referencing Olivia Farrell again, her and I actually looked at a bunch of different stuff in her section because she already got it read and stuff like that, highlighted everything. Very good job, Olivia. The big thing about it, though, is in her sections and stuff like that, if any of you are having any kind of confusing things, like you don't know what certain quotes mean or something like that, so, like just run in the morning or in like after school, or maybe like catch me like right at the end of lunch or something like that, and I can help you look over those things and help you decode them a little bit. Because Marx does tend, he's translating everything from German, so it does kind of tend to have like some very, very verbose sentences and stuff like that. But Marxists and socialists are beginning to separate it a little bit. Now, Marxism was originally a socialist itself, but he felt that socialism didn't go far enough, right? Now, a big thing about it that we also need to understand is that socialists are beginning to realize that they are not locked into any one country. There is no difference between a German socialist, an Italian socialist, and American socialists, which are also growing during this time period as well, right parallel with like the European socialists. Like next year in your AP Euro, or excuse me, in your AP US class, you'll talk about Eugene Debs, right? And Eugene Debs is the founder of the American Socialist Group, and is actually going to kind of do a lot of organizing and almost gets elected president at one point, right? Now, socialism, though, is not exclusive to any country, because even Karl Marx himself said that a working man has no country, right? Working men have no country, because the idea is more along the lines of workers share these commonalities. So that's going to be a really big important thing spilling into World War I, is socialists are going to be extremely anti-war, because in their perspective, they're going to be like, well, why is this working man from this country fighting this working man from that country? Because in reality, we just send poor people to go and shoot each other. We don't send rich, right? So it's very important to understand this concept that socialists are moving away from nationalism and actually moving more towards solidarity of working people. Now, socialist parties are also going to grow in every single country. Now, we already talked about this a little bit when we talked about the German example, right? The German example being that of the socialist party that was growing in Germany that Otto von Bismarck, with his negative integration techniques, tried to actually stamp down. Remember, he passed the anti-socialist laws in the late 1800s where he's saying you can't wear your insignias, you may not get elected as parties known as socialists anymore, and they kind of fired back with their little red flowers and their little red threads and calling themselves new names like, oh, the Labor Party. Now, the big thing about it, though, as well, is that things are going to get catalyzed, though, okay? Now, the Communist Manifesto was written in 1848, but becomes super popular in 1888, right after Karl Marx dies, okay? So in the socialist community, there was a little bit of turmoil, right? There was a little bit of turmoil. I'm like, what's going to be most effective? How are we going to do this most effectively? Should we lean into the things like the Match Girl strike and actually using strikes and boycotts and nonviolent protests and civil action, which has been seeming to like actually get a lot of things done? Or should we move towards militancy, which is something that Marx advocates for, okay? Now, some of y'all, as you keep reading through this entire, like your sections and stuff like that, a big thing Karl Marx advocates for is violent uprising. He believes that literally, like in the Communist Manifesto, he states that the only way to undo the deeds of capitalism is to have a violent uprising where we destroy the bourgeois, which is the working, like, or excuse me, not the working, but the wealthy people, and then the proletariat will rise up, and those are the workers, right? Well, the thing about it is, like, there was all that turmoil, and they're beginning to kind of really disagree with one another. But in the late 1800s, you're seeing the formation of international socialist parties. Now, one of the big ones is in 1888, you see the formation of this thing called the Second International of Socialists. Now, some of you are like, well, if there's a Second International, what happened to the first one? There was a First International of Socialists. It had started about 1868, but it's actually going to dissolve relatively quickly in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And they form a second one, right? And so the second one's going to be a lot more effective. And one of the biggest things that the Second International of Socialists actually organizes is a holiday that's still celebrated in 66 different countries all over the world. And it's meant to be one of those things of, we have no country, we are working people. And it's known as May Day. It is May the 1st, where all workers refuse to work. It's called International Workers' Day as well, right? It is a general strike day. And on May 1st, 1889 is going to be the very first one, right? That's going to be May Day, and it's going to be the solidarity of labor. And to this day, it's still actually celebrated. And actually looking forward, you actually can see a couple of little cool pictures of like May Day right here being celebrated. This is in 1960 in Moscow, right? This is during the Cold War that this is being celebrated. And of course, at this point, Russia was communist and stuff like that, or believed to be communist. They were actually militarily socialist and things like that. But we're not going to get into those delineations right now. But as you can see, even children would march in these big parades, join hand in hand, wave their red flags, and advocate for the ideas of this general strike day of May the 1st, right? May Day. I feel as though, maybe AP Euro will just lead a general strike on May the 1st. Let's not actually do that. We'll probably get in a lot of trouble. But the big thing about it is, yes, as you can see, this is something that was a very, very large holiday that's still celebrated in the modern era, right? Actually, 66 countries all over the world still recognize May 1st as a day of, labor-free, of being completely labor-free. This is my favorite one, though. This is from 1968, and this is a girl in Ukraine celebrating. This girl does not look that happy. These balloons look very sad. But you know what? At least she didn't have to go to work or school that day, right, I guess? So, I love her outfit, though. I love the outfit. I love the little red sash and the sweater vest, right? The haircut, on the other hand, might need some work, all right? She might be upset about that. Now, the big thing about it, though, when we're looking at it as well, the thing is that going into it, this, May Day is going to be a solidarity of labor. Now, who is this going to terrify? Who does this idea of a general strike worldwide terrify? None other than the conservatives and the classical liberals, right? Because they are the ones who own the bulk of the businesses, right? So to pacify workers after the very first May Day, after the very first one, which the very first May Day was actually held for one particular reason. They wanted an 8-hour workday, okay? They were like, we need to solidify the idea of an 8-hour workday, so it's going from 9 to 5, right? Which, of course, we all know this famous song that actually talks all about that. 9 to 5, what a way to make a living. Nice. Thank you, Dolly. Now, the big thing about it, though, is to pacify workers and things like that, to avoid barricades. Concessions are going to be made. Classical liberals in the parliaments all over Europe are going to actually pass a lot of different movements. They're actually going to do wage values will continue to increase and will rise actually double in the late 1800s. More voting rights are going to be extended in places like Great Britain and places like that. They're going to get up to 99% suffrage in Great Britain. And then also the Germans are going to do universal suffrage for all men over the age of 25. Quality of life in cities is going to begin to rise due to things like May Day, right? And you're also going to see the growth of labor unions, right? And when we talked about the Match Girl strike and stuff like that, this picture or whatever, or whatever, but this picture you can actually see, this is the strike committee of the Matchmakers Union. That's right, the women of the Matchstick Girls actually organized a union, and theirs is going to be the kind of prototype for unions that will grow all over Europe. This right here is also a famous membership card of the International Socialist, right? The Trade Congress and the International Socialist. This is the second, actually you could be a card-carrying member of the Socialist Party that actually spanned every country rather than just one, right? So now, going forward, though, that means that we're seeing something important happen here, though. The success of the Match Girl strike, the success of the Blackburn riots, the success of the aftermath of the Haymarket explosion, which is another thing you'll talk about in AP US because a bomb actually went off in Chicago, and that in the aftermath there was going to be a lot of labor regulations passed and stuff like that, right? It's called the Haymarket riot. Now the cool thing about it though is this is going to actually actually grow quality of life, and the 8-hour workday would be adopted by several different companies in a lot of different industries throughout Europe, right, following the May Day strikes and the continuing May Day strikes every single year. So the thing about it is what we're seeing, though, is that Marxists are getting a little upset because workers are beginning to rely more on their votes than the idea of militancy, right? Now, Marxists are just saying in the back of their minds, well, this is just the classical liberals and the conservatives pacifying you with little things to keep you suppressed. Whereas a lot of socialists at the time are actually beginning to say, well, no, I believe that this is just more effective, right? I think that this is more effective to get workers better rights is to actually use certain strategies like relying on voting, right? Like relying on striking, relying on boycotts, and crippling businesses from within. And this will actually help us be able to kind of adapt or create better quality of life standards for our workers, right? So now what we're seeing is a split, right? You have people known as revisionists, and then you have Marxist militants, right? Okay. Now the Marxist militants will eventually be called communists, and the revisionists are what modern day socialists are, right? Modern day socialists are what you would consider revisionists, right? And this is actually adopted and kind of put forward by this guy, who was a European author that actually kind of really liked what Marx had to say, but he just believed that a violent overthrow wasn't necessary, right? His name was Edward Bernstein, okay? Go ahead and write that down. Edward Bernstein is going to be the guy that actually adopts and kind of creates the revisionist theory of socialism, right? And so the big thing that's happening in the background right now, you just need to remember, is that revisionist socialists and militant Marxists are beginning to split into two different directions. And militant Marxists are going to be people like Vladimir Lenin, okay? The famous Russian who leads the Russian Civil War as well as the Russian Revolution of 1917 Don't worry, Sophie. We're getting closer and closer. Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is you also have to understand there's going to be another big thing that pops up that socialists are wildly against. Now, this, of course, I'm speaking of is the growth of imperialism in the late 1800s, right? Imperialism is a massively important thing that we have to talk about, and I know that all of you are about to start sobbing right now due to the fact that it's one more ism you got to remember. But imperialism is wildly important for multiple different reasons, right? Mostly due to the fact that it's not talked about enough, right? So like imperialism is going to result in genocides that are not talked about enough because it didn't happen to Europeans, right? Like so imperialism is going to result in the current economic state of many countries being very unstable due to the fact that Europeans came in, introduced things that these people didn't ask for, and then just left after World War II, right? So the thing that we need to understand is that imperialism is going to be a very, very important issue that we're going to discuss, and we're going to discuss it very in depth because I will not sit here and try to rush through it at the expense of not talking about other cultures, other races, and other moments in history that might make us sometimes uncomfortable, right? But let's go ahead and get into it. First off, before we talk about anything else, we got to talk about the big imperialism questions, right? What is it, okay? So, like, I know I'm sitting up here talking right now about imperialism and how it's going to be a very important thing that we discuss. We got to talk about what it is first. Imperialism is the policy of extending the rule or authority of an empire or nation over foreign countries, right? So it's the concept of one developed nation taking over or subduing a lesser developed nation, usually for its resources or for its economic value, okay? So for example, I'm going to show you a quick political cartoon that kind of wraps up imperialism in an essence. We got the okay, that's the Beerus, I can't spell. British imperialism octopus. All right, so like now, this is a very famous cartoon that actually came out in the late 1800s that was discussing the growth of British imperialism, right? And there's one quote that you can also write down if you would like that will actually help you understand imperialism a little bit better. It's a famous quote that says, "The sun never sets on the British Empire," which is a disgusting fact of the matter in the late 1800s, is that during the late 1800s, Britain owned so much land that at one point or another, while the world was turning, sun was always shining on it, right? And so as you can see, that idea in this cartoon as well. England is represented right here by their famous character known as John Bull. John Bull wears a little top hat. He's got like little red curly hair tufts that pop out the side. He's their version of Uncle Sam, right? So the thing about it when we're looking at it is notice John Bull right here, representing England, has these arms that are just extended into all these different areas that they have no right to own. In reality, they have no right to own and have no reason to be there, right? They've got their hands in Egypt, in the Suez Canal, in India, which is their main colony for several years. They literally refer to it as their crown jewel, right? Canada, Jamaica, Ireland, all right, of course, being brought in. Now, when you know is going on in the background of this, of course, Ireland is trying to fight for its own independence, and it is going to actually accomplish that. But you've also got Cameroon, the Strait of Gibraltar, like you got Boer Island over there as well. As you can see, the British have their hands in a lot of pots that they should not have them in, right? So the imperialism idea is that extension of control over those foreign countries. Now, some of y'all are going to be like, well, Mr. Terry, haven't we been talking about this whole time? Like going all the way back to the 1600s, right? Going all the way back to the 1600s with the founding of the Roanoke colony in the late 1500s, with the founding of Jamestown and Plymouth. What's the difference between that and imperialism? Well, that's what we're talking about right there is a difference between two different states of fact, okay? Colonialism occurred during the early 1600s more so than imperialism, right? Going into the 1700s as well, when people would basically essentially set up physical colonies, right? Like colonialism was the idea of like, okay, we're going to go set up a settlement in this different place, and like we're going to take some of our people, move them there, and they will begin to populate and then grow these settlements into large colonies where we will mine raw materials and send them back, right? But the thing about it is that's colonialism. Plymouth is a colony, colonialism. Jamestown is a colony, colonialism. New Orleans is a colony, colonialism, right? Imperialism, on the other hand, uses military force to suppress natives in the pursuit of economic growth and then force the native people that live there to also create the raw materials, bring them back in, and then also the cost of their lives. So the biggest thing that you could argue that we've seen imperialism early on is the encomienda system. You could actually say is the earliest like kind of vestige of imperialism that we've witnessed, right? Now, what's the point though? Why are the Europeans doing it in the late 1800s? And the biggest reason why is to make money, all right? So they're taking over countries for their resources, all right? Especially because the Industrial Revolution has created a higher demand for these resources, right? And especially the second Industrial Revolution as well. Examples of this include palm oil, rubber, cotton, iron, copper, gold, diamonds, all these other like small, like scarce resources that you can't find in Europe whatsoever are being found in places like Africa and also being found in places like Southeast Asia, right? Especially rubber in particular are going to be found in what is going to be known later on as Vietnam, all right? So like, of course, like the French are going to take it over for the rubber tree populations, right? Also in the Congo, in the middle of Africa, the Belgians under King Leopold II are going to go there to try and take it over for its rubber vine resources and things like that. Now, palm oil was a big one as well. They're going to use that as lubricant in factory machines to prevent them from seizing up and things like that, and it became a very hot ticket item for the Europeans. Now, land as well. The Suez Canal is a really good example. They took over Egypt and suppressed it from Ottoman control just so they could build a canal to finally physically connect the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean so they could actually pass their boats through the Suez Canal region. And there's going to be this thing called the Suez Crisis a little bit later on because the Egyptians are going to be like, well, this is our land, this is our stuff, get out of here, Britain. And the Suez Canal crisis is actually going to result later on in the nationalization of that item, that Suez Canal, for the Egyptians as well, which is a very main like thoroughfare of economic trade to this day. Now, are there motivations, of course, outside of imperialism, or excuse me, outside for imperialism outside of money? Of course there is. A big one, of course, is going to be nationalism. A lot of these countries believe that their ideas of their like superiority is going to grow from imperialism, and we are going to actually pick up talking about all that stuff in the later motivations for imperialism when I see y'all back in class, okay? So I'll see y'all like tomorrow. Sorry also for this being posted so late, but like I had to ref 4 lacrosse games back to back yesterday. So, but the big thing is I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one. Hope y'all have a great rest of your weekend. We'll talk soon, all right? Y'all have a good one.